Welcome, Colin and Garrett. It's so nice to have you on the podcast.
Great to be here.
I told you as before we started, I'm a little bit obsessed with this book. It's interesting because I used to say my favorite sales book was To Sell as Human by Daniel Pink. And no offense to him, it's still a great book and I love it. But this feels like the new generation of that book because you talk about all of the ways that everyone is selling. Why don't we start with you, Garrett? Can you just tell the listeners how you guys got to this place where selling has become your obsession?
Gosh, it's two different stories that kind of meet in the middle. But I started out as a lawyer, had no inclination of speaking about selling, of selling myself, of selling products. But it turned out I sucked at that and I wasn't very good at it. And it also turned out that I wanted to be in the world of startups. And the easiest way to get a foot in the door there, which still is true today, I think, is through a sales organization typically. And so I joined my first startup on the sales side, and I did it without it was a startup, so I didn't have any really great training. I didn't have somebody going, "This is exactly what you're supposed to do." I was kind of figuring it out on my own, and I started to have some pretty good success there. And so I think, as far as how we got here and that sort of thing, for me, it really starts with that, with the fact that I got into this world with no background in it, not knowing that I wanted to do it, not having the quote unquote right way to do it, and realized as I was figuring things out along the way that a lot of the books I was reading and the people that I admired who were kind of talking about these more mindset focused things as opposed to the standard, this is what you're supposed to do. Those were the concepts that were really like resonating with me. And when I looked at things that I was doing well, I realized it was because of that stuff. And when I looked at things I wasn't doing well, it's because I wasn't doing those things. And so for me, that's where it started. For us collectively, I'll defer to Colin to kind of tell that part of the story. But we came from very similar schools of thought. And when we finally did meet up and get to start building things together, that's when it really took off, because we realized all these crazy ideas that we had in our individual heads actually worked. And it was fun to actually codify that stuff and put it into practice and then put it into words.
Yeah, Colin, tell us about your sales background.
Okay, but first, is that a new t-shirt there?
This is an old t-shirt. I was going to make fun of your US golf. I assume that's the Olympic golf shirt that they're going to be.
This whole thing? Come on, dude. I may or may
I was
not.
thinking the same thing. We're in Olympic trials right now, and Colin's all decked out in the Olympic gear.
Yeah, for those listening, he's wearing a gorgeous blue Nike golf shirt with a big old American flag on his left shoulder.
I just took up golf, and I may or may not have just, hit 9. So, okay. Back to my, my sales. Here's the bridge, the segue. My sales background has nothing to do with playing golf or any sort of typical sales activity. I was first generation college student. My parents put a lot of pressure, positive pressure, and really just onus on the credibility of your job and your career. So when I graduated college, I was looking for a real job, not a quote unquote sales job. But I just didn't have the bank account to like just wait around for my dream job. So I took the first one I could find, which was sales. And I was actually really bad at it because of the preconceived notion that most of us have on who a salesperson is. And so for the first 3 months, I was bad. And you know the story because you read the book, but I got put on a PIP, decided to dare them to fire me early. So I stopped reading the script. I stopped abiding by the dress code. I stopped laughing at jokes that weren't funny. I stopped asking questions I didn't want to know the answers to. And I accidentally broke the sales record like that month. And that was this huge unlock for me. It was a moment where you realize that these were human beings that you were actually really curious about, like at an authentic level, like just as a human being. Like it's like, oh, if I stopped treating them like a transaction, they stopped treating me like a salesperson. And what that really boiled down to was we were starting to see each other in each other. And so that, for the next 6-7 years, I was the youngest director of sales or the youngest trainer, all of these like young accolades. But honestly, it was just because I was very good at teaching people how to be bad at sales. Like that was it. Because nobody wanted a good salesperson in front of them. They wanted a human being, and human beings are imperfect.
Yes, and authentic, which authenticity rings throughout the book. And you talk at the beginning about this inauthenticity aversion that human beings have, and that sort of in the sales that you're talking about, Colin, like the typical, what we think of as salespeople is so inauthentic. And this idea of you have a quote there that says, a drop of inauthenticity poisons the well. And I think that really is such an important part of this, and how that sort of weaves in with credibility. Because don't you think, for the regular listeners of the podcast, I talk all the time about building belief. My background is as a trial attorney, and I want to get to how you talk about trial attorneys as salespeople, because I talk about that too. But my job in the courtroom was to build belief, but so is a salesperson's job. And it's so much easier to build belief when you know the people the way that you talk about, Colin. And I see that throughout the book. So I guess we'll go back to you, Colin, for this. Authenticity and credibility, where do you see those two overlapping? And which of those, if you can pick one, is more important for a strong salesperson?
Authenticity is such a hard thing to define, but that is the answer. We interviewed Chef Roy Choi, and his definition of authenticity was really beautiful. He said, it was a question back to us. It was like, well, which authentic self of mine? Right. And that was the point, that you could have multiple authentic selves. But, I boil it down to this curiosity thing that I brought up earlier. Like, to sit in front of someone that genuinely wants to know something about you that most people don't.
Yeah.
Like, that is a fascinating thing. Like for so many levels, like, why does this person care differently than most people? Right. And have I even had that thought before? Like, do I know the answer? And so this is just an example. Like, if someone authentically wants to know something about you, and they ask you a question because they care about you in a different way than most people do, and you know the answer to that question, and you're ideating for the first time in real time on that answer, that's a gift. Like, most of us extract value by asking questions, but the authentic, curious person, sometimes, too curious, right? Let's be clear. Like, sometimes you can cross authentic boundaries, which Garrett can talk a lot about, because he does it all the time.
That was coming. I knew that was coming.
But you know what I mean? It's just one example, but authenticity is the core theme of the book, because listen, Snoop Dogg said it, Bob Simon said it. Everyone that we interviewed were saying the same things that didn't know each other were saying it. And they were basically, Snoop's quote was, we asked Snoop, like, why is everyone telling us you're the greatest salesperson on the planet? And he just said, do you, and everything else will take care of itself. And every answer that we got from every great salesperson we talked to was some version of, nobody's better at me doing me than me.
Yeah.
I think everything Colin said is right. And as you asked the question, it was an interesting and impactful question, because it was putting authenticity and credibility against each other almost in a way that I hadn't thought of before. And as Colin was answering, I realized that I think credibility, it's not authenticity or credibility. The credibility stems from the authenticity. And like you said, that drop of inauthenticity, when that happens, that's when you lose the credibility. So you can't have credibility without authenticity. And as we're saying this word a lot, and I realize that it's cringy for a lot of people to hear the word authenticity, but what we're really talking about is the imperfections and the honesty, and not having to be the polished, perfect, fill in the blank salesperson, trial lawyer, parent, whatever.
Well, and I think that it goes back to that point of which authentic version of me, because
Mhm.
I think it's Seth Godin once had a line like, I might authentically feel crappy, and I'm not going to go into a sales meeting and say, I'm having the worst day of my life and I really don't want to be here. And that might be quote unquote authentic, but it's the best authentic version of you, I guess, is the part that brings the credibility. I loved the conversation around the trial attorney, because we sell our cases to juries all the time. That's like inherent in what we do. And I don't think that people always think about it. The other thing, so I defended doctors in medical malpractice cases. And towards the end of the book, I think it's chapter 6, where you talk about the team approach. You talk about, I think it was Steve Jobs' doctor, who really saw himself as selling the treatment plan to the patient and then making a decision as a team. Do you guys come from this, from a place that every single job, every single person listening is selling every day?
Yes. Is that our opinion? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, we're in this conversation, we want you and the people listening to like us. That's a certain form of selling. Like, we don't want to come across as weirdos or something like that, right? We want people. If I want to have Colin's wave his hand. If I want to have Thai food for dinner tonight and my wife's not feeling it, I'm gonna have to sell her on that. So absolutely, and that's not a new concept. I think Daniel Pink talked a lot about that in To Sell Is Human. It's like we are constantly, anytime you are having an interaction with another human being where you're trying to get them to see something a certain way or take a certain action, that's a sale. So yes, is the short answer to your question is yes, and that was the long answer to your question.
No,
But
and
I just want to double down on one thing. The answer is yes, and it's not a yucky thing.
Yes.
Like that's like the most important, like when you talked about Steve Jobs' doctor, right? Like being able to sell someone on and say the word sell on a treatment. Like there's no way that he can do that if he thinks that the word sell equates to something that is smarmy and yucky and pushy. And so like that was the whole reason why Garrett and I even started teaching. Like we were in the enterprise realizing that people could not do anything other than the job that they were hired for. They couldn't communicate. They couldn't ask for what they wanted. They couldn't follow their dreams. They couldn't change their world or anybody else's world because they didn't know how to move people.
yeah.
Right. And so like, how do we not teach people how to move people? That was where like this idea came from. Moving people is something that is not yucky. And in our keynotes, we ask people all the time, and we do it in the book. We're like, hey, what do you think of when you hear the word salesperson? And everyone goes yucky. And then we're like, who's the greatest salesperson you know? And everyone talks about someone they revere and admire. And it's like, there's a disconnect. And the first hump is selling is not yucky. Selling is moving people, and nobody has changed the world that they didn't know how to move people. Steve Jobs or an engineer.
Absolutely. And the power of knowing how to do this, whether it's to get your wife to eat Thai food or to get the patient to go with the treatment plan that's most likely to help them from a place of respect and authenticity, to all of your points, it's so important that good people learn how to do this and embrace it so that it's not just the yucky people who are already good at this, who are sort of getting everything that they want in life. So everyone listening, you are all selling every day. And given that that is true, you definitely want to buy this book, if for no other reason than the chapter on pathological optimism, because that chapter changes the way you approach everything. So why don't we go back to you, Colin, and tell the people what pathological optimism is all about?
That's such a hard, it's talk about a layered answer, right? It's not toxic positivity. I just stole that line directly from probably what Garrett was about to say. The only other thing that I was about to steal from Garrett, I'm not, which is like a whole thing on weaponizing, and he's going to bring it home because it's important. I think that like, listen, I think that optimism at its root, when it comes to selling, is the difference between talking to someone like you need something from them versus talking to someone like you actually value them as a human being, right? Like if you thought this was your customer, then how would you treat this person?
Yeah.
Right. Versus like if you were trying to get them to be your customer, like that optimism, it's learned optimism. And it's the most interesting thing that we deal with our students because they're always right. Like some of our students will be like, hey, there's no point in trying because it's just so hard. I'm never going to get the job. And the answer that we always give them is you're absolutely right. And then you got this other person that comes and goes like, I am delusional. I'm just going to keep trying. Like eventually I'm going to get a bite. And like we can say with all honesty, with the word eventually in there, you are right. And so this learned optimism thing like is really just rooted in how could you look for the good in people? Because isn't that what you want, right? That law of reciprocation. Yeah. Like if you want people to look for the good in you, or you want people to look for reasons to believe in you, like you have to have that. So that's my version of it.
Garrett, you have anything to add to that? And then I have.
Of course I do. A huge part of a lot of the chapters in our book is about how do you get into a mindset where you're showing up as the best version of yourself. And people want to be around positive, optimistic people. So the person who's constantly pessimistic, no matter what, that person that's not somebody that people want to talk to, that they want to get engaged by, that they want to buy from. And so Colin mentioned toxic positivity. when we say that great sellers, that people with an unsold mindset are pathological optimists, we don't mean that they think, oh, everything's going to be great. That, you know, even though my deal that was going to make my year just fell through, everything's fine. It's absolutely not that. But it is a belief that over time, things are going to be up and to the right, that things are going to be, you know, work out in their favor, that they're going to learn the lessons they need to learn to accomplish the things that they want to accomplish. And so they just show up differently. And so it's you know, looking at a lead that comes into somebody's business and they're like, oh, this is a big company. They're probably not going to buy from me, but I'm going to have the conversation anyway. That's a very different sounding conversation than the person who gets that same lead and goes, you know what? I'm going to treat these guys like they're already a customer anyway, because why not? And I'm going to, and they're going to come across differently. And that comes across in several chapters in the book. But for me, that's the most important part about pathological optimism, is that by having that long-term belief that things are going to work in your favor, you're going to sound different. You're going to ask better questions. You're going to just be a better person to be around.
Yeah. And
I want to, sorry, I want to give a story. It's so good for what Garrett just said.
Yeah.
Like and it's in the book and you know it, but it's the couch cushion story, right? Where like this number one seller comes into my office, sits on this couch and goes, hey, I have a problem. Your new salesperson's hoarding leads. So that's a problem. You never want your number one salesperson to say they have any problems. I bring the new salesperson into the room. He sits on the same couch. I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, nothing, you know, I'm doing well. What do you want to talk about? As soon as I open my mouth, he starts like shaking his butt back and forth on the couch, like back and forth. And I look at him and I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, oh, this is such a nice couch. I'm like, all right. I try to open my mouth again to start speaking, and he's standing up, like butt in my face, flipping over couch cushions, trying to find the tag of who made this couch. At this point, like it's entertaining, right? Like I just sit back, I'm watching him. He finds the couch cushion tag, sits down like I'm not in front of him, opens his laptop up, starts going on LinkedIn, looks up at me and goes, they have 6,000 employees. They must need software security and identity access management. And I go, okay. And he goes, can I prospect into them later? I'm like, sure. He's like, what do you want to talk about? Puts the laptop down, moves it away. And I look at him, I said, absolutely nothing. You found a deal in a couch cushion.
Yeah.
Like the same couch cushion that my number one seller said there were no opportunities, right? So like to answer the question in totality, like great sellers, great leaders, great lawyers are so good at finding opportunities where nobody else is looking, not where they don't exist. And that's optimism.
Yes. And it's creativity, which you talk about towards the end of the book. But that story reminds me, I loved the story of the person who was looking on LinkedIn and they were seeing like all of the people who had worked at a company that they had already sold to, thinking, where could some of these employees have gone to another organization that I can now sell to? It's constantly thinking, being creative and looking for the best. Colin, you said looking for the best in people. And I think one of the things that rings throughout the book, I don't know if it's ever said, maybe it is, but also looking for the best in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't do it otherwise.
Yeah. We Garrett and I have most of the time Garrett and I come from completely different perspectives and we always meet at the same place. And confidence is one of those places. Like it's really interesting. It's not really in the book and it's not explicit. It's definitely off track. And I love that we're going here. Like I tell Garrett, he's like a self-deprecating king. If you listen to Garrett, he won't say a darn good thing about himself, but I know he feels himself, we travel a lot. I catch him in the mirror, and meanwhile, I'm the complete opposite. I know I have to be delusional, right? So I just start at the point of delusion when it comes to confidence, because my parents told me a long time ago I was really special, even though I wasn't. I just believed them, right? So once again, rooted back to optimism, rooted back to confidence. Yeah. It's just, So I think, yes, believing in yourself is one thing. What we do mention in the book is believing that you can get paid for what you love doing, and that you can find these moments, even in the mundane, where you can intentionally ignore things that don't authentically give you passion. Yeah. And you deserve, right, to do these things that you love. And if you're fresh out of college and an early career professional, you have to be really good mentally at looking for the things that you love inside of things that you don't, right? It's not all going to be roses, but how are you intentionally ignorant to the things that you don't love if you don't know what you do love? So it's a big question. I'll pass it to Garrett because, like I said, he comes from a different perspective.
I got nothing to add. You were too confident there for me.
Ah, it's the shirt. It's the Olympic shirt.
Yeah, I think it's more than confidence. It's belief in the customer, right? It's belief in yourself. It's belief in the product. Like the guy with the couch cushions, he had to believe that that they had the best product to want to go and then reach out to whoever made that couch. I think it's like all these different beliefs sort of
Or
combined.
to your point, he had to believe that he was going to be the right partner as a human, because he might be selling a product that is commoditized like 95% of everything.
Yeah.
And like then these people are just making decisions on who they'd rather spend time with. And to your point, which is really an impactful question because we hadn't heard it before, like he believes that he is a better human being for this partnership than someone else, given that most things are commoditized. And
Yeah.
that is probably where your point comes in really valid.
Yeah, I think it's so important. As I read the book, it was so much of looking for the best. I mean, looking for the best in people, including yourself. And so that optimism, it's that pathological optimism. It doesn't mean you have to think you're the best thing since sliced bread, but looking for the best in yourself so that you can go out and do the things. I have to tell you, there's a portion of this book that I have underlined, and I know I will go back to read because I come from 20 something years of defending doctors in medical malpractice cases. Now I run my own business and I have to sell myself for the first time in my 51 years of life in the way that we think of sales. And the part of the book about not needing to know everything is so contrary to my work as a trial attorney, where I was like, I have to know everything about this case so that no one surprises me and I don't lose credibility and the other side doesn't sneak up. But it makes so much sense to me that in sales conversations between human beings and not in the courtroom, it's not as important. But Garrett, drive it home for me so that I can stop rereading that part.
Well, it's the perfect overlap between what Colin just said and what I said earlier, because Colin mentioned intentional ignorance, which is what you're talking about.
Yep.
And it's this concept that you can intentionally ignore the parts of your job that either you don't know that much about or you're not that passionate about. And the reason that that's so important is because what I was saying earlier, how you show up as the best version of yourself. You sound really different when you're having a conversation with somebody talking about something that you are passionate about or something that you are super knowledgeable about. Whereas if you have those conversations where you kind of have to fake it a little bit, I'm sure as a trial lawyer, there were times where you had to research a specific topic and you had to get up there and fake it. And you're going to sound a lot different than if you get the expert up there who lives, sleeps, and breathes this exact same topic. And so that's really what it's about, is like, how do you create an infrastructure around yourself with whether it's people or resources, documents, whatever it may be, that allows you to not have to go out there and pretend. Now, there's certain things that every profession, every job, you're going to have to go out there and know certain things. But we know from experience that there are also a lot of things people think they have to know everything about that they just do not. And you'll just show up better because you get to talk about the things that you love and are passionate about, and other people get to come in for you and talk about the things that they love and are passionate about.
Well, and I also
And
think,
people,
go ahead,
sorry,
Colin.
I was just going to say, and people hate know-it-alls. Like you forget all the time. Like your job is not to know it all because nobody wants to be around a know-it-all. Like there's so many examples where people were getting way more credit for being resourceful and going out and finding and fighting for people and finding answers and bringing resources in. Like that was how they were showing their worth. They weren't showing their worth because they acted like they had all the answers and knew the questions before people were answering it, and it wasn't hard for them or challenging. And these people didn't have agency in the decision-making process, right? Like if you know all the answers, then what do you need me for? Right? Like that sense of agency is really important in that conversation.
Yeah. And I think that one of the things, like getting curious with the buyer to say, what am I missing? You tell me, you give me the answers, because it sort of brings us back to the team chapter where it's like we're a team coming to the conclusions rather than me just knowing it all and forcing it all upon you. You have a statistic there. It was from Gartner, sort of Gartner's successor. I don't remember the name of the organization, but it said sellers who provided less information were 62% more likely to close. That's so helpful for those of us that think that we have to be know-it-alls, to know that there's this strong evidence that you actually are not serving yourself to going out and trying to know everything about everything, and rather letting it be a little bit more organic.
Yeah, there's like a self-awareness thing here. Like that's honestly what we're talking about. We're like, if you don't know what you sound like, if you don't know that you sound like a know-it-all, A, you're normal, and B, you got to work on it.
Yeah.
Because like that is the secret. The secret is that great sellers, no matter what your title is, are more self-aware than most people. They just know what they sound like. Like
Yes.
what didn't make the book, because Garrett would not let it make the book. So I always make it a point to bring it into the podcast. Do you know what a gleek is?
Yes, I know exactly what it is. My friend used to do it in school all the time.
Okay. So it's like, thank you. I'm so happy that you said that, by the way. It's a 50-50
Did.
shot. Like some people don't know it, but like for the audience, it's like, it's when you spit on someone, but it's like a very small particle that like, it almost feels like it comes from like the depths of your soul. And it's got this like velocity, like, and it's normally on accident. Like you're normally talking and you're like, oh,
Yeah,
there's two
it's
types of
this
people.
stream of spit that my friend JJ could do it on demand, and she would do it on the
Yeah.
people in like the row in front of us, and then
Like a
literally,
tongue thing, right? Like she would like
yes,
flick the tongue. Yeah. Which is
I'm
why
sitting here just remembering why we didn't put this in the book.
no, it's amazing because it makes total sense. Here's the punchline. There's two types of people in this world. The type of people that gleek on you and act like they didn't just hock a loogie on you. And the type of people that gleek on you and go, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And they wipe your shoulder. And we value people that show their mistakes because that's the only common denominator. Me and you don't have a lot in common, right? Like I don't know you that well. So maybe I'm sure we do,
no,
like
but
books and things, but we don't have a lot in common. But the minute that I show you that I'm imperfect is the minute you're like, oh, he's just like me.
yes, yeah. And I think so much of it comes down to belief. You know, when you talk about Oprah, you know, towards the end of the book, you talk about like Oprah, and she could sell without us knowing, like feeling sold to, but books and her favorite things and people and like Dr. Phil and all the people that she brought on. And it's all the things you just talked about. It's authenticity and curiosity and credibility, but all of it sort of comes down to people believe her. So if she says a book is good, people run out and get it. And I think that your book, every chapter is a block in the tower of believability, of being in a position where people believe you. This time together has flown by, but before I start to wrap up, I do want to talk about the part about falling in love actually, because I think that this is a great way to sort of underscore everything that you guys have just said. Garrett, what is the fall in love actually idea as it pertains to selling?
I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but it is about how you show up talking to the other person. Like you know how you sound when you're having a conversation with somebody that you love, that you care about, or somebody that you think you might be able to love, right? Somebody that you're just interested in knowing versus a conversation that you have to have because it's part of your job or because you've been thrown together in some kind of setting or whatever. It is a different sounding conversation. And so it really stemmed from this exercise that Colin came up with a long, long time ago that sort of evolved with the two of us, but we call it the 3x3 love exercise. And it's a take on a traditional sales exercise where people like sales trainers historically would tell people, okay, before you go into a sales meeting or a sales call, spend 3 minutes doing research on the person to find things that you can use in the conversation. And so it might be like when Colin and I were selling software security, it might be that you Google the person and you see that their company had a data breach or something like that. And the thinking is that you bring that up in order to make the sale. And that's fine. Research is extremely important for any sort of professional sales setting. But the reason we didn't like that exercise is because the subtext is that you're looking for things that you can leverage against the person that you're talking to like get them to buy from you as opposed to have them solve their problem. And so we've evolved it over the years, and now we tell people to spend that 3 minutes doing research, but instead of looking for things you can leverage in the conversation, look for things that you could love about the person that you're going to talk to. And so it might be as simple as going on their LinkedIn and seeing that they're involved with a charity that you are also passionate about, or that you admire their career trajectory, or that you just like the outfit that they're wearing in their profile picture. It like really doesn't matter if it's big or small, but we know for a fact that you show up differently, that you sound different, that you ask better questions because you're genuinely curious and excited to go and talk to this person, as opposed to having it be some kind of contest where there's a winner and a loser.
Yeah. I think it's so interesting. I just gave like right before this, gave a masterclass in my membership on tone of voice. And there's that study, I don't know if you guys know this study out of Yale that says that you can tell more about a person's emotion from their tone of voice than their body language and facial expressions combined. And when I'm looking for what I love, my tone of voice is going to reflect the curiosity and the love, which is going to be felt by the person on the other side of that sales conversation. So it's such a organic way to get there rather than sort of trying to like fake it or like psych yourself up and do some sort of like motivational power posing. No offense to power posers, but I think it's just phenomenal. The book is phenomenal. It's got stories, it's got interviews, it's got Snoop Dogg. And I have to say, you mentioned Snoop Dogg. So have you seen, Colin, Snoop Dogg's he's at the Olympics and he's doing like, oh my gosh, anybody listening, I'll put a little link to it in the show notes. Snoop Dogg is like doing the commentary for the Olympics and he is hysterical and it's very authentic and it's perfect.
I was just going to say that, like, it's so obvious, like, why everybody loves Snoop Dogg, because there's no question that is exactly who he is.
Absolutely.
It's universal.
Absolutely. And he's sold so many things as a result, right? He's with Martha Stewart. He's selling all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I could talk to you guys all day. Everyone has to buy this book. Buy it, read it, listen to it, however you want to bring it into your brain. But no matter what you do, you're selling and you want this book as a resource in that respect. Before I let you go, I need to ask each of you, I will start with you, Garrett. What book would you recommend to my listeners other than your own?
I'm going to go with fiction. Can I go with fiction, or is that going to derail things? I recently read a book called Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver.
So good.
And it is not a happy, positive read in any way, but it was so eye-opening and so moving. I think it won a Pulitzer or something like that. It won a big award, so I'm not the only one who thinks this, but it really moved me. So I'm gonna go with that one today. A little bit off of my normal beaten path, but it was a beautiful book.
I love her and I loved that book. It's a big book. Read it on
It's
Kindle
big.
so you don't see how big it is.
Yeah. I read the physical copy, and now it's like a doorstop somewhere in my house because it's pretty heavy.
Huge, but worth the read for sure. What about you, Colin? What book would you recommend?
For your audience, I think that I just read Super Communicators by Charles Dughigg.
Yeah.
He's great. I mean, I love his first habit book, like, a lot, like The Power of Habit. So I'd say Super Communicators, people would get a lot of value from.
So good. Both great books. I loved them both. All right, I can't wait to hear your answers to this question. Your answers to this question, both of you, will be added to the Elegant Warrior Spotify playlist. I'll turn it around and start with you, Colin. What is your theme song? When you're walking onto the stage of life, what song is playing in the background?
I'm going to be cheesy here. Tomorrow is my 10-year wedding anniversary to my wife. And when they announced us for the first time as a married couple, we came out to Calvin Harris, When I Met You in the Summer. And like, I don't know about a better entrance song, because we didn't come down until like it really, like, until the bass dropped. So anyways, I'll go with that. I could walk down the stage of life with that song any day.
I love it. And happy anniversary. What about you, Garrett?
I mean, Colin knows what I'm going to say. The greatest pop song in the history of pop songs, Call Me Maybe, Carly Rae Jepsen. How can you not feel happy listening to that song? It's impossible.
How can you not feel happy hearing Garrett say that is the real question.
So good. I should ask you to sing it, but I won't. Guys, thank you so much for this book. Thank you for the work that you do, changing our perspective on selling and allowing people to step into their authenticity while they do it. I think it's so important, and I appreciate you coming on.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.